So with that, we are very blessed though to have Bennett Dottridge with us
Bennett
tonight.
Dottridge.
Benny. Sorry, I apologize. Bennett Dottridge. So, and since we are the Historical Society, listen to this. Benny's great-grandfather was the founding fire chief here in Cotuit in 1912. You believe that, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
He founded the fire department.
He founded the fire department.
Started it.
Benny's grandfather was the state fire warden, who then carried on from there and served here for many years. His father was also chief and forest warden for over 30 years.
In the town of Barnstable.
For the town of Barnstable, and then Benny himself started in 1960 and worked for 41 years. You believe that? Serving our community, and retired as assistant fire chief in 2001. So that itself, I think we have an extremely well qualified presenter. Benny and I have worked, Benny prepared the presentation, I put together the slides and the pictures, and I think it's really going to be informative because I learned a tremendous amount from Benny about the history of fire on Cape Cod, and after all that, I know that much. There's so much more to know. So with that, Benny, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, I didn't have much time to get this done, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of reading, but we'll get through this. As of 2004, the wildland forest fires, the Cape was number 3 on the list of most dangerous places for wildfires behind California and the Jersey pinelands. In the early 1900s, Cape fires started becoming, the Cape started to become part of the fire lookout stations. They built fire towers in some of the towns in the highest points, and they built a platform or something, and they improved upon them as the time went on, and they were manned by men and women. The Barnstable Fire Tower was put up in 1914, and some years later, the town of Yarmouth and the town of Barnstable each put up $500, and they put up a steel frame, and they put a house on top of it. And they eventually ran a telephone wire over a mile through the woods to get to the fire tower so that they could connect with the fire stations. Shortly after that, they put radios in the fire towers, and they could connect to the fire stations by radio. And they had fire patrol trucks. Started back in the early 1900s. As soon as they had vehicles that could drive, they put people in vehicles. They put pump cans in there, and they drove around looking for smoke during the fire season. The towns, some of the towns had their own patrol trucks. Some of them didn't. The town of Barnstable, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, yeah, I think Benny, we talked about, you're gonna go back to going back to 1780.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna,
Okay, 1780.
way back in history.
In 1780 was called the Dark Day. In the early morning hours of, I don't know what time of year it was, but the early morning hours, the lightning strike started a fire west of Sandwich. And the clouds became so dark that it darkened the sky, and they call this the Dark Day. It's been generations since the practice of burning, they used to burn off the fields every springtime. The Indians did it to keep the underbrush out. Sometimes they got away from them, but they tried to keep it under control the best they could. But they burnt the fields off, and they burnt the underbrush, which didn't harm the tall trees, to keep down the fire danger. Didn't bother the standing trees because they were tall, and all it was burning is the stuff underneath them. A lot of the trees on the Cape were pine trees at that time. I don't know when the oak trees came in. They were probably oak trees there too, because I think oak trees are native to Cape Cod. But they were tall, and underneath them was the brush. In 1875, you can go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
1887, there you go.
1887. In 1887, a huge fire burned over 25,000 acres from Pocasset to sections of Bourne and Sandwich. The fire destroyed primarily approximately 600 cords of stock for the Sandwich Glass Company, as well as standing oaks and pines ready to be cut. The glass company was forced to then burn coal. Coal was more expensive, and it eventually put them out of business. In 1923, May 30th, 1923, a fire began in the woods in the Cassett village. By the end of the day, they thought they had it under control. They had burned about 1,000 acres. The next morning, the fire erupted again. Well, this happened for 7 days. And by the time they had it put out, it had burned 25,000 acres and gone to Bourne, Sandwich, South Sandwich, East Sandwich.
And we're on the,
that's where it is.
yeah, I think 1923 we jumped to, and this is when we had to really find a solution.
In 1923, the State Forest Fire Department, fire commissioners, state forest commissioners bought up a lot of the land that was burnt, and they created a state forest, and they called it Shawm State Forest. It was later, in 1938, it was renamed Shawm Kroll State Forest in memory of Lincoln Kroll, who was a longtime state patrolman who was killed when his patrol truck was hit by a train in Brewster. Again in 1928, the Cape Fire Protection concerted effort was made nationwide for the prevention and programs. The Cape Cod Fire Prevention Experiment, Southern Forest Education Company and Prevention Experiment, and the Southern Cape Cod program involved 110,000 acres of scrub oak and pine. The experiment was intended to compare the suppression cost and the suppression cost.
But I think you're telling me that they, the study asked the question, is it better to just to prevent and to catch things early and suppress?
Yes.
Yeah, and the answer was prevention, right?
Prevention. the answer is prevention. The best way is prevention, and this is when Smokey the Bear was developed.
What does prevention mean? And when I'm saying that is, what do you do to prevent a fire? Do you create
You have fire towers with lookout people looking out. You have patrol trucks going around, and you educate the public to clear vegetation around from their houses and not to burn when they're not supposed to burn, and kind of follow the laws.
Yeah.
This is when Smokey the Bear came along, prevent forest fires.
Fair enough.
And
One of the things that Benny told me was that the control of underbrush, right?
you know, the control of the underbrush, they do controlled burns now. And they did some controlled burns then, where they go out and they take an area, and the way they do it now is they take an area, maybe they're gonna burn 100 acres, and they split it up into every so many feet, they make a break. They cut a path down through the woods where there's no vegetation. And so what they do is they go along and they'll set a backfire along that edge and let it burn in a little bit. And then they'll go along all the way around it and they'll set a backfire around it to let it burn in, and then they let it go. And it very rarely gets away from them.
How many days would it take? So if you did 100 acres,
Well, they do that in a day.
okay,
Wow.
They might do 600 acres in a day sometimes.
okay. And how many fire departments would participate? Would be like Sagamore and Sandwich?
They have the state brush breaker, and they have 2 or 3 other brush breakers there. They probably have 4 brush breakers and a couple of tank trucks, and they have pump cans. The guys wear pump cans, and they've cleared this enough and gone through there and mowed it so that it doesn't, they make sure that they walk along through there with a pump can, so they make sure that it doesn't come across that line. And they do a little bit here, and they do a little bit there, and then they move up the next side, and they do a little bit there, so that they get around the edges first, and then they set it off, and usually they have no problems. You'll see smoke sometimes in the springtime or any time of the year, and sometimes you'll smell smoke in Cotuit when they're burning down in South Mashpee if the wind's blowing southwest, and everybody calls up and says, "I smell smoke," and that's what it is. So they do a lot of it at Otis or Cape
Joint Base Cape Cod.
Joint Base Cape Cod. I still wanna
Is
call
it only
Otis
this part
'cause
of the
it was-
Cape, or is it
Pardon?
all the way out to Provincetown?
They do it all over the Cape.
Okay.
The challenge, Benny, is that our forests here are more mature, right?
Right.
They're kind of
the upper
scrubby
Cape,
farther out.
the upper Cape forests are more mature than they are down the Cape. Down the Cape, it's not as wide as it is up here, and down there they get more wind, and the wind holds the trees down. If you notice trees on Cape Cod and then you go off Cape, and you notice the trees off Cape are much taller, and that's because of the wind. We have a constant wind out of the southwest. That's why windmills are good. You know, they put them offshore here because there's always a wind blow.
And that explains why this is like the 3rd most dangerous area
Yes.
in the country is the wind.
Yes. And the Pine Barrens down in New Jersey, they have terrible troubles down in New Jersey with the Pine Barrens. They have, because it's still wide open land down there where the Pine Barrens are. It's all protected land. I don't know if it belongs to the state or who it belongs to, but they get terrible fires down there. And it's because they have all the fuel that's in there. I don't know how much burning they do like they do here, but They have brush breakers down in New Jersey, and they have brush breakers on Long Island. They have problems a lot on Long Island too, and they call them smoke jumpers. They have 5-ton military chassis that they put bars around it so they can drive through the woods. And they all look the same.
We're gonna come to some pictures. It's amazing, the development of these. Bernie, do you wanna go to the tragedy in 1938?
Yeah. April 27th, 1938. There were lots of forest fires going on at the time. Another one started just off of Route 130 in Sandwich. The forest warden and 3 recruits, it was a deputy fire chief, and 3 recruits went into the woods to try to fight this fire. They were using pump cans and tools, and they got surrounded by fire. The wind was blowing 40 miles an hour out of the southwest, and it was a bad day. They got surrounded by fire, and they all got burned. They were taken to Cape Cod Hospital, where they died one after another. There was 3 of them. 3 out of the 4 died. There's a memorial up on Route 130 in Sandwich. It's opposite the Sandwich Fire Tower, but just beyond the Coke plant on the left-hand side, there's a little turnout that goes in there where the road used to go around. Well, there's a stone in there, and you can see the flags in there off the road, and that's what that's for. It's right around there where they died.
So the big event was 46.
The big Cape Cod fire brought response from 45 cities and towns across southeastern Massachusetts and Cape Cod. It burnt for several days. Started over near the Bourne Bridge in Bourne, the base of the Bourne Bridge. They believe it was caused by German prisoners of war that were clearing land and burning on a day when they shouldn't have been burning. But yeah, prevention, they didn't prevent. It burned for several days, burned 15,000 acres. What else? My grandfather at the time was the state forest warden that was in charge of the fire. They brought a camera crew in to ride with him in his car. My father was driving his car. And there's a film, there's 4 films on YouTube called Cape Cod Fire of 1946 Cape Cod Fire. If you look it up on YouTube, just look up Cape Cod Fire 1946. There's four videos. They're silent videos. They're about 20 minutes long, but it's pretty good. It's very good for the time. 1965. Another May 1st, 1965. In dry, warm, temperatures were in the 75. Prevailing winds southwest about 35 miles an hour. The fire towers reported smoke out in Otis at 12:54. They reported it to the Air Force Base, and they sent the 2 breakers up. They dispatched the 2 breakers. By 101, the Bourne Fire Tower reported the fire's moving fast. 103, the Bourne Fire Tower said there's lots of fire. 106, the Bourne Fire Tower said it looks real bad. The state forest warden requested 8 more brush breakers and 5 tankers. One of the first brush breakers to get there was the Mashpee brush breaker, which is right down the road. The Mashpee chief was on the brush breaker, and he requested 10 more breakers right away now. At 113, the Barnstable County Fire Patrol plane, they had a fire patrol plane that's started back in the 50s. Barnstable County Fire Patrol plane reported an area of 40 to 50 acres spreading very fast. About 120, all brush breakers on Cape Cod and 7 brush breakers from Plymouth County had been dispatched to the area. State police were requested to close down Route 6. A request went out for all available pumpers and tankers to respond to Route 6 and Route 130. Another request was made to Plymouth County for all available pumpers and tankers to report to Route 6 Board Sandwich Town line. At 2:20, the fire jumped Route 6. During that time, my father was there. He rounded up all the brush breakers that he could gather. He didn't want them to get down to Route 6 because he said it's going to just jump Route 6. They're not going to stop it there. So he rounded up all the brush breakers he could. The ones that worked for him, he was in charge of Town of Barnstable brush breakers, the county brush breakers, and anybody else that would follow him. And he started trucks on both sides of the fire and worked the side fires. Now, when you're running a brush breaker at a fire, you're supposed to go in down the sides. And the idea is you go down the sides and you eventually pinch it down so till you get the head fire is very small and you can cut it off. When you get a big fire going, you can't just jump in front of it and stop it. It ain't gonna happen. Now, the only way it's gonna happen is what they did in Sandwich. They stopped the fire about 3:30. The fire trucks were lined up bumper to bumper on Route 6A. Well, down along 6A, they had their pumpers. They could use their pumpers and their tankers. Actually, the tankers needed to be back up, filling up the brush breakers that were coming down the sides. But if you don't take and cut the sides down, what happens is the fire behind you all of a sudden starts going out, burning out on the sides, and next thing you know, you got another head fire coming down. So it gets bigger and bigger. So the only way to really put it out is to go down the sides. They didn't put the fire out at 1:30, they stopped it at 1:30. They had to continually go down the sides and pinch it off and put it out.
So when you say pinch it off, they're taking these.
It squeezes it, just as you're going down, you make it smaller and smaller and smaller. See, in this fire, they're trying to stop any new head fires from breaking off and going.
And the trucks
So-
themselves, are they knocking down everything?
And knocking down trees as they go. The first brush breaker that starts in there, he goes along about as fast as he can go. He's really moving. And he's doing what he can do. The next brush breaker behind him does a little bit more. And then if you've got a half a dozen trucks in a row, then the back ones put it out. So the first ones are just going, trying to catch it and knock it down so that it's not as big for the next truck behind you and the next one and the next one and the next one.
Benny, how big a tree did you show me a brush breaker can knock down?
Brush breakers can take down a tree like this.
Now for this fire, since they closed down Route 6, I assume they closed down the bridge.
I don't know about the bridge, but they closed down Route 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was listening to this, I don't know where it was. Our breaker went, I believe they were on patrol, so they went with whoever was on the truck. It was just 2 people on the truck. our engines didn't go because the engines that we had at that time only carried 125 gallons of water. And 125 gallons of water wasn't gonna go far in a brush fire like that. So we didn't get called for those things until we got an engine that was bigger, that carried 500 gallons of water. Most of the brush breakers today carry about 750 gallons. They were, the ones back then carried anywhere from, our small one carried 250 gallons. It'd be anywhere from 250 gallons up. They're really looking for the big ones that carried 800 to 1,000 gallons of water, because they can last longer. They use bigger lines. They can put out more fire.
Benny, when you're talking about pinching in the fire, you know how when you're hearing reports on fire on the news, it talks like being, say, 50% under control or 60%. Does that relate to that in any way? Or is that a different thing?
You're talking about stuff off Cape. A lot of stuff that you're hearing about is off Cape. And when it has certain amount of control, they don't use brush breakers up there. So they're talking about an area. They used a lot of hand tools and pump cans. And when it comes out to a road, they use engines. They don't have brush breakers. They have brush breakers in Plymouth County and Barnstable County and on the islands. But beyond Plymouth County, I don't think there's any brush breakers. They have what they call brush trucks. They may have a military truck that's been converted and carries a tank, could be 800 gallons of water, 1,000 gallons of water, something like that, but doesn't have bars on it. They might be able to drive through the woods a little bit here and there, but they have rocks off Cape. And even on the north side of the Cape, we have rocks, and you have to be careful that you don't hit the rocks. Because if you get hung up on the rock, sometimes it's hard to get off of, and sometimes it breaks things.
Thank you.
How many brush fire trucks are on the Cape?
Right now, there's 7.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is where, to your point about what we can do, Bernie's got the different steps we've taken on. You guys, find me $100 if I do it one more time. Benny he has a series now on how we respond to get to the point about prevention, detection, and suppression.
That fire burnt thousands of acres in 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that shows you how fast it can go. Now, there was a fire in Plymouth that burned 10,000 acres in about 5 hours.
Wow.
In the 60s. We lost one brush breaker, the county brush breaker, the engine blew on it. I'll get back to brush breakers in a few minutes. The fire tower is one of the most important factors in prevention. Preventing small fires become large fires is the fire tower. In the early 1800s and 1900s, a number of fire towers were erected. And see, on some of the highest hills across Massachusetts, not just the Cape, Massachusetts. There were towers staffed by men and women who knew the area and could keep a sharp eye. The first fire tower used by the state was a wooden tower built by public subscription in 1987 on Chute Flying Hill in West Barnstable. In 1912, a wooden watchman's cabin was put on top of the tower. In 1914, a steel structure was put up with funds from Barnstable and the Army. first radio in a fire tower was installed in about 1937. Eventually, more fire towers were built on the Cape, and they were located in Bourne, Sandwich, Falmouth, Barnstable, Dennis, Brewster, and Wellfleet. Today, they staff the fire towers in Bourne, Sandwich, Falmouth, and Barnstable during real bad fire season. The rest of the time, there might be one fire tower up, but the rest of them are, there might be one in Sandwich. They can see a big area, but the chances of forest fires now with all the vegetation, once the vegetation comes out on the leaves, then the danger goes down because the forest stays wetter, stays damper underneath.
Benny, tell them about your maps that you had, that map that you had with the fire
Yep.
towers.
Getting there.
Oh, you got that in there, okay. That was fun.
Before the motorized vehicles, they just used pickup trucks, whatever they had. They took dozens of strong men and lots of muscles to do their hand pumps. They had hand pumps that they could supply hose lines. Other than that, it was pump cans and rakes. And they used the rakes to scrape whatever vegetation they could. If you're lucky enough to get a bulldozer out there, bulldozers are good at making fire breaks. I saw one operated in Sandwich when I was there with my father one day. There was a fire coming out to 1:30, and bulldozer came along. He was coming along the side of the fire, and he was going like hell. He came along, and he had to stop every once in a while. He had a guy with him with a fire extinguisher, and the guy would jump off and put the fire out on the bulldozer because it would catch fire, and then he'd jump back on, and they'd go off again. And I swear to God, he came off the ground when he went up over this hill, but he was moving that really fast through there, knocking the trees. He had the blade up off of the ground a ways, and he was just knocking those trees down just as fast as could be.
Benny, we had a question over here on the
Well, I
right.
just had a question about the cans that you wear on your back in the 1900s, I guess.
Yep,
And how much water did they hold? And
they held about 2.5 to 5 gallons, about maybe 5
so you're
gallons.
just running back and forth?
They just
filling
go
it?
back out
Yeah.
and get more from
Okay.
wherever they had the water.
Okay.
If
Pretty
they had-
brave people.
Oh my gosh.
Today they use the same thing, but they don't use cans. They're a backpack that forms to your back, and they put them on and they carry 5 gallons of water, and they have the same squirt thing on them to squirt the water, and they're horrible to carry through the woods. We
That's
didn't
when
carry
you
any on our brush breaker. We'll get to brush breakers in a minute.
Maybe I'll get to this, Benny, but
Mhm.
you always see in California, the wildfires,
Yep.
the planes coming in,
The planes, they use a lot of planes in California.
but I've never heard about that in the
Yep.
East Coast, like in New Jersey or Massachusetts. Is that Just a
We'll get to that
California
in a-
thing, as they
We'll get
say?
to that in a second here.
okay?
Okay. Let's see.
I think their next one is some old fire stations. You gave me these pictures, Benny.
That's Cotuit Fire Station. That's, in the 50s. The one on the left is engine 3, carries 400 gallons of water, and it was the first one due for everything. And the one on the right is a 1942 Dodge that was purchased by the government because we had Camp Can Do It down off of Old Post Road, and so the government bought us a truck. It was very similar to the other truck that we have. That top picture is 316, the brush breaker from Center Velocity. That's the first brush breaker that was built in 1937. First fire it went to was in Hyannis. It burned about 2,000 acres, and it burnt up. Now, this was built by the men in, actually at the garage next door to the fire station. Mr. Stark owned the garage, and he was also a fireman. Everybody was firemen back then. And he and some others built this truck, put bars on it in 1937. Now, by 1937, the chassis got big enough so that they could carry more water. They had about 800 gallons of water on that truck. So, and that was pretty good for that era, to have a truck that would carry that much water and could go through the woods. And it worked very well. It was replaced, they repaired it, they rebuilt it, put it back in service, and it was replaced in 1952. And then again, it was replaced in 1967. So they each lasted about 15 years. But they were very good brush breakers, they worked very well. The one below there was,
Will you move back up?
yeah, back up a second.
There you go.
The other this brush breaker, next one down was 267, that was our Cotuit's brush breaker. That was built in 2001. I was on the committee to build that before I retired. That had 750 gallons of water on it. And it's very similar to the Plymouth brush breakers and the state brush breaker that's here, which is designed in line with the Plymouth brush breakers. The town of Plymouth has about 10 brush breakers. And they're all pretty much this design here. They come up with a design that worked very well, and the only thing they did is improved upon the chassis. They kept the same design, and Carver, all of the fire departments, most all of them in Plymouth County have breakers like this. The next one down is breaker 6 from Shawm Crow State Forest.
Is there a blade on the front of that?
Pardon?
Is there a blade on the front of that? What takes the trees down?
The bar in the front.
The bar in the front.
See that bar in the front?
Yeah, okay, just smashes it right down?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
The bar in the front. And the idea is to have the bar out pretty good distance. And the angle on the bar down to the bumper is important, so that you're able to push the trees over.
How fast would the truck be going to do that?
Let's see, you're in low range, 4-wheel drive, when you're in a fast creep. And you can get it going, if they're really going through the woods after something, they've got that thing wound right up. And they're going like hell. And they've got it, that engine is just wound right up, going.
Are they going fast or?
They're not going real fast, but they're going fast enough through there that you couldn't walk along beside them and keep up with them. So you can go to the next one.
That's what you mentioned, the first one.
Yeah. First patrol truck was Robert Cross was an Osterville resident, and he built the first patrol truck in 1922, and he kept it in this barn because there was no fire station. In 1926, Senator Osterville Fire Department was incorporated and they built fire stations in Centerville and in Austin. And they were able to house it at the fire station. Now this is that was a picture of the brush breaker. And this is a picture of the bottom one. I think that's where the brush breaker is burning up. And like we said, there's only 7 brush breakers left on the Cape. Bourne, Falmouth, Mashpee, Sandwich, and Otis has 2. They have our old brush breaker. Our old brush breaker was given to Otis with the understanding that if we needed it, they would send it with a crew. This is the first county brush breaker built, let's see, wonder when my date's kept.
Oh, so space age, doesn't it?
Futuristic tank.
Hold that there a minute, let me just,
I think this was the 1950s.
the story goes the Barnstable Forest Fire Department had the first brush breaker. They started the Forest Fire Department in 1922, the fire warden was Robert Cross. That's what I wanted to see, he was the fire warden.
How did these withstand that impact? Like, are they just smashing through the woods? Just
You mean the
like, how-
banging of the trees, how do they withstand it?
Yeah,
The
Yeah,
humans
how
driving.
The heat,
how are
everything,
they
yeah.
built so that they don't get
You know,
demolished?
it's, cause you knock it, you hit it and it's going right over, and it's not like you're getting into an accident. It can be if you hit a tree that's too big,
Or a rock, yeah.
or a rock.
Are the drivers really buckled in tight? 'Cause they've got to
They
feel
are
something.
now, they have a seatbelt, but they didn't used to.
Well, they had pictures of guys riding on these, holding on to the sides.
Whoa.
No, just don't go anywhere.
Here's some,
Look at the tree
Benny,
with
here's some other
rock
ones that you
built.
gave me
No.
pictures of.
Yeah, go back to that one.
You want me
This was a county brush breaker. Well, the first county brush breaker that was built. It's 1930, no, 1942, I think it was. Doesn't matter. It's built on a Ford chassis.
It looks more like 1940s based on the grill.
It was housed in Cotuit.
And the hem lengths of the
Those are
dresses.
Cotuit firefighters. Those are probably
Oh, you guys are looking at the
These are
right
probably
place.
Cotuit firefighters in the 4th of July parade or something, if there ever was.
Oh, wow.
And eventually, they built a newer one.
Can we go to the new ones, Benny?
And the first one was built in the 30s. In 38, the first one was built and was put in the Cotuit Fire Station. In 1942, they built another one that was newer, and the old one went to North Falmouth, and the new one went to Cotuit. The top brush breaker on the left was our brush breaker 215. Ended up when it was our truck, when the town of Barnstable disbanded, whoever had the breakers in their stations, they bought the brush breakers for $1. That brush breaker, I drove that many times. That would go any place that big trucks would go, unless they could go around the big trees and go around them. We could get to places that the big trucks couldn't get to because of there was hills that were too tall, too high, or too steep, and there was too much. The trees were too big; they could go around them. And we never had pump cans. We got to a fire, and my brother got to a fire in Mashpee one day, and the chief says, you get your pump cans and you gotta come down here. And he says, we don't carry pump cans, we drive to the fire. He says, you can't drive to this fire. He says, where are we going? Right down here? And he drove down and went down into the fire and they put it out. I did the same thing in Sandwich one day. We got called for a brush fire that was on the Sandwich Mashpee town line because Mashpee's brush breakers were out of service, so they called out. Mashpee called for our truck. We got there and my brother was there. He was a full-time firefighter in Mashpee, and the Mashpee trucks were all lined up along the road. And they had gone up over this hill with pump cans and whatever else. So we went around behind the trucks and drove up over the top of the hill, got up on the top of the hill, and we started putting the fire out up on top of the hill. The Mashpee chief, the Sandwich chief came along and says, how'd you get here? You know, I said, I came up behind your trucks and I went around them and drove up over the hill. He says, you didn't drive up over that hill. I sure the hell did. He says, when you go for water, I'm going with you because I want to see you come back up over that hill. So he went down with us when we went down for water and we drove back up over the hill. And he says, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it. I says, that's why you guys don't call for my little brush break that can go anywhere. But it could go anywhere. We went down Sandy Neck with it several times.
Benny, every one of these trucks have a different design. Is that just something?
Yes. The truck on the right is, can't see what it says on it, but Born. That's a 5-ton military chassis that they built into a brush breaker. The one on the left here is Barnstable's 216 that they built in 1964. My father built that truck. And that's one of the best, that was one of the best brush breakers on Cape Cod behind Mashpee's. Mashpee's 354 was just the best one going. It was built by Chief Peters, who was a Wampanoag Indian, and he was a mechanic and he knew what he was doing. He knew all about brush fires and he knew all about trucks. And he built that brush breaker and it was the best on Cape Cod. Right, and 216 was right behind it. The one on the right is the brush breaker that came before the one up here on the top left. That was our breaker. That was the town of Barnstable Forest Fire Department's breaker that was housed in Cotuit. That held 250 gallons of water on it. It was a Dodge, actually, I don't know, the military version of the Dodge that the government used. They just put bars on it and a tank in the back, and that would go very well through the woods. Not quite as good as this other one, but very well. But they all went through the woods pretty good. Okay.
This goes to your question about airplanes, Benny.
Eyes in the sky. Barnstable and Plymouth County each acquired planes, fire patrol planes in the 50s. They ran them into the 90s. The Barnstable plane was damaged in the landing. They didn't use it anymore, so they sold it off. But I'm not sure about the Plymouth plane. That went a lot farther on than that. They used them for spotting forest fires. They would go up on bad days and just fly around the Cape and look for smoke. They concentrated more on the upper Cape than down the lower Cape because there were more fires on the upper Cape. There's more area that was open. From the 1960s, when the building boom started, when they really started building houses, is they built houses, it took away forest lands. And today, with almost a build out everywhere, there aren't as many forests to burn, but there's still the potential there to have a forest fire that could burn any number of acres. If it gets going very good, I don't know what they're gonna do. But they seem to,
What months are the worst months for fires?
pardon?
What months are the worst?
The worst is, starts in March, depending on if there was snow on the ground. If there's no snow on the ground, it can sometimes start in March and April, usually April, March, April, into May. And then usually the leaves start coming out on the trees around Mother's Day in May, the middle of May. And after that, it drops right off fast. There was one time when there were lots of fires first thing in the morning. My father was on the patrol truck. He worked on the Forest Fire Patrol truck for 10 years before becoming the forest warden. And he found out that the governor was on Oyster Harbor's golf course. So he drove over there and asked the greenskeeper if he knew where he might be, and he told him where he thought he was. And my father drove out on the golf course and found Governor Volpe and brought him back to the clubhouse and had him call in to the state to authorize. They had to have the governor's authorization before they could open the fire towers. And by noontime, they had all the fire towers manned. My father was a very persuasive person. He didn't take no for an answer. We tried to get him to be the state forest warden for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but he refused it. He didn't want it. They were just trying to get him off their back. We spent a lot of time in Boston getting laws passed, and he didn't let anything get by. They had a fire in Plymouth in the 60s, and the county brush breaker from West Boston blew the engine, and it had some fire damage to it, but not too much because they set the nozzles all up to spray on the truck to keep it from burning up. And they had a wrecker come in and towed it out of the woods and took it to Maxim's in Middleborough where it was built, and they put a new engine in it. They got the truck back within a week, and my father got the bill and took it to the county commissioners and put it on their desks, and they said, "What is this?" They says, "That's the bill from the new engine of the brush breaker. We didn't authorize this." He says, "It was an emergency, and I have the authorization to do anything in an emergency. Here's the bill. How are we gonna pay for it? That's up to you." And that's kind of the way he was. There's one other thing that was, there's one other thing that.
Your dad's name?
Robert
Your dad's name?
Dottridge.
What was it?
Robert Dottridge. There's one other thing. I was at a fire in Otis that was up around Paved Paws and came along parallel to Route 6. And we were out on the High Line with one of our pumpers to fill up tanks of water if we were needed. And they had a tank retriever out there. And a tank retriever, you know how big tanks are. Well, a tank retriever is something that goes out and retrieves the tank and brings it back, pulls it back. So this is a great big thing. And it's almost like a great big huge tank that's, I don't know, 10, 15 feet wide, maybe wider than that, with tracks on it. Very, very heavy. And he asked somebody that was in charge if there was anything they could do. He says, "Can you make me a fire break here?" They said, "Sure." He drove that thing through the woods, back and forth, and he knocked down trees for about, at least a couple 100 feet. just plowed them down, flattened them. So when the fire came along, the trees were all knocked down. And I think they stopped it before it got there, but it was an amazing, something you wouldn't find anywhere else except on the Air Force Base. All right, where are we at?
This is our last slide, was on the question of prevention. This was what Benny had given me, his recommendations. Keep the brush away from your house.
Keep the brush away from your house. A good distance. Limit the clutter and combustibles in your yard. Rapid response. Call the fire department right away. Don't try to put it out yourself. Call the fire department and then try to put it out. Then you can get your hose and go try to put it out, but call the fire department first. Let them know you got a fire anytime, even in your house, anything. First thing is call 911. Don't try to put it out yourself. You got a fire on top of the stove, call 911. And then if you have something to try to put it out, that's fine, but call 911. And if there's much of a fire, get out. You need the right equipment for the job. If you have a fire extinguisher, you can try to put the fire out. If it's too much, just get out. Don't stay in the house. In the yard, don't get in a position where you're getting yourself into trouble. Today they use a lot of rakes and backpacks. And they have, on the Cape, lots of departments have brush fire trucks. They're not brush breakers. They're a 2-ton truck, carries about 300 gallons of water, and tools, backpacks, with water, fire extinguishers, and tools, and they used the backpacks and tools recently up in Bourne this spring in a place the brush breakers couldn't get to. So they had brush breakers fighting where they could fight. But they had a fire down in a hollow and in a place there in Otis, and they went in there with, I don't know how many crews. There's some departments that have crews that are trained for backpack firefighting with backpacks and tools. West Barnstable has a crew, and they have a truck with 600 gallons of water on it, and they have all their equipment on the truck. Any questions?
I got a question, Benny, about, is there any special tires that you put on those trucks so that they don't burn easily?
No. They're heavy. The tires that they have on there are the heaviest tires they can put on the truck, so that things don't go through them when they're going through woods. Very rarely do they get a tire that's punctured. They might get a tire that is knocked off the rim, so they get a flat sometimes, but they don't get flats very often.
I was thinking more of melting, if they're right up
Well,
along.
if the fire gets to the truck, they can burn the tires. But generally speaking, no. Sometimes they'll drive along the edge of the fire, and sometimes they'll actually go into the burn and to put the edge out if the fire is, the burn isn't very wide. They'd rather you not go into the burn. They'd rather you go along the edges. What else can I think of?
Cindy?
Benny, I had the pleasure of interviewing you over at the Historical Society a few years ago for a newsletter article. And you told me this wild story about fighting a fire on one of the estates down by the bay, I think. I'm afraid I can't remember the name of the people, but I think someone maybe died in the fire.
Oh, Wickham.
But it was like
That was a Wickham.
it was Wickham.
Yeah, Wickham's house.
We had,
Could you tell us about that?
we got called the Wickham estate around 3 o'clock in the morning. This is back in the mid-80s. And we got there and there was smoke visible and you could see fire inside the house. And Mr. and Mrs. Wickham were hanging out the windows in the back of the house. She was hanging out the window in her bedroom and he was in his office. And his office was all wood paneled, real wood. The fire had started in a fireplace down in the first floor. He liked to have a fire every night, and his caretaker always set the fireplace up, so all he had to do was light a match, and he could have a fire in the fireplace. Well, the fire evidently, after he went to bed, it threw out some sparks into the room and started the rug on fire and got the room downstairs on fire. So the downstairs room was on fire, and this was a real old house, and the upstairs fireplace and the downstairs fireplace were in the same chimney. And as the fire got pushed, the hot fire built up in the downstairs, it pushed it up the chimney into the upstairs room and set the upstairs room on fire, his office on fire. And he was a big man, and we were able to get her down off the ladder very quickly, but he was another story. We couldn't get him out through the window. The window was too small, and he was too big. And he was screaming because the back of him was burning, and they finally just yanked him out the window and down the ladder. And when we brought him around to the front of the house on the stretcher, the back of the house just blew out. It was just one big kabang with a ball of fire. And so now the whole end of the house is on fire. They called for more help. I went upstairs and on the second floor. The guys had put the fire out on the first floor, and fire on the second floor. They put the fire out on the second floor too, pretty quickly. But the fire got up into the attic, and there were 3 chimneys, 3 roofs built one on top of the other. And the fire was between the roofs. We broke every axe that we had trying to get through the roofs, and we couldn't get through it. And they brought the Senator Loss to a ladder truck. They cut the hedge right down on the fence, and they brought them into the yard. The front end of the truck sunk right down to the frame. They put the ladder up to the roof, and somewhere they got a chainsaw. Eventually, and they cut through the roof, and that's the only way that we stopped the fire in that house. But we were there for 13 hours. Originally, I was up on the second floor, and we used what they call a pipe pole to pull the ceiling down. It had a hook on the top of it. You jam it up through, and you pull it down. It's back when they had the wood laths. Well, you used to pull it down, and you get a whole bunch of wood down, and the laths and the cement that they use for the ceiling, plaster. Well, this was wire laths. It was just a wire like fence, real fine mesh, and so when you pull down on it, you got a hole about this big around. And you had to keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling to get a hole big enough to put a ladder up into. So we had a pencil ladder, which is a small ladder that you can use to get into tight places, and we've stuck it up through there. And I climbed up the ladder and I took the nozzle and swung it around up in there and knocked the fire down right where I was. And as soon as I came down the ladder, it's cold, whoosh, fire just came right back through. And it kept doing that every time we did that. And they were doing the same thing further down, somebody else was doing it, until they were able to get the chainsaw up there and cut holes in the roof. That's when we finally got it under control, but we were there for 13 hours altogether before we went home. And Mr. Wickham eventually died. Mrs. Wickham survived. He eventually died from his burns in Boston.
Is that house on Ocean View Ave?
Ocean View Ave, 182. They rebuilt it.
They rebuilt it to look the same, right?
But smaller,
Kind of, but
much smaller.
Kind
Yeah.
of, not quite the same, no. That house was built out of timbers of trees. It had trees that were cut and hewed to make the foundation, and the floors were all trees that they had cut off and they had flattened out. The thing that was built way back, I don't know when it was built, but a long time ago. Long time before that. That's the story.
Any questions for Benny? Yeah, I know. So I think, Benny, we learned a lot tonight. Probably we didn't realize that fire on the
Like I said, my grandfather started the fire department in 1912, and he was chief 27 years. My father was chief for 20 years, my uncle for 8 years. They tried to get me to be the first full-time chief, but I couldn't take the cut and pay. I was working for the electric company, and I was paying child support, and they didn't pay enough money. They wouldn't pay me for coming back to calls, even straight time. I just told them I just can't do it.
Well, Benny, I think we also, on behalf of the Historical Society and all of us here, we want to thank you for your 41 years of service protecting our community, our lives, and our children, and making Cotuit a safer place. And Benny, hopefully that'll continue long into the future as we get our new station and everything. So, thank you so much.
My grandmother also worked in the fire towers, in the Barnstable fire tower during World War II.
They should make a TV show about you guys.
Yeah.
The Red Bloods. The Red Bloods.
She saw a plane go down, and in Hyannis, and she called the Hyannis Fire Department, and she says, there's a plane that just went down, and I think it's in front of the normal school, where the town office is now. I think it's right in front of the school. And sure and shit, it was in a tree right in front of the school.
Where is the Barnstable Fire Tower?
On Shoot Flying Hill in West Barnstable. You see it right at Oak Street and the Mid-Cape Highway.
Okay, sure.
It's right there on the northbound lane.
And Cindy, Carol in the back, I'd like to introduce Benny's wife. Carol is behind, and she has some documents she might want to pass.
Pictures and documents and stuff.
She might want you to consider for our collection. So,
I'd like to
do that, see them.
put things together.
well, thanks again, and our next Chronicles will be in August, and we'll be learning on a complete change of pace. We'll be learning about the history of the Christmas tree shops. So I look forward to seeing you all there. But thanks again.
Remember the